Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Saturday, April 22nd, 2017 edition of VR News. Going to start with the Daydream view, which we don't talk about a lot because there hasn't been a lot to talk about. We've talked about the launch, pre-launch, sales not being as great as they had hoped, and the odd game, and that's kind of what this article is about. Now, I still plan on getting a Daydream to complete kind of the collection of all the mainstream devices. And I'm going to do that because once I hand in this Galaxy phone, which is actually my work phone, not a personal one, I'm going to have to find a replacement, another Samsung, for my Gear VR, because the phone I have waiting in the wings, the Google Pixel XL, isn't going to run on that. I hope it does it in one day, but for now, that will be the Google Daydream phone. Now, this article talks about exactly that. Games on the Daydream View, and while there aren't a lot, the article says, look, there may not be a lot, but there are a couple of gems. Now, looking at this, that's sort of accurate. One is a game, but I wouldn't classify the other one as a game, and we'll get to that. Let's start with the first one, which the author of the article calls Enthralling Strangeness, and that game is called Untethered, and it's an episodic mystery from a company called Numinous Games. The next one, and this is the one I was talking about earlier, is BBC's The Turning Forest, which is a children's storybook basically brought to life. Now, could you call that a game? To me, that would be classified as an experience. But I get the point. I get the gist of what he's trying to say, that while there may not be a lot for the Google Daydream, there are some pretty worthwhile apps, whether they're games or experiences. Regardless, there's some good stuff to try. Any of you out there with a Daydream, even if it's, your own device, secondary, I don't care which, but I'd love to know what you think of it. Has it kept you entertained? I know my time with the Gear VR is pretty sparse, tends to be evening stuff, not during the day. So is that the same with you guys? Let me know. Next story, this one very applicable for me in the near future, and that is how to set up a room in your house for virtual reality. And this is a news piece on wired.com. Now, it sounds Captain Obvious, especially when they list their first step. And they've got 4 steps that you need to do. Now, I would also just add to this story and say, I think there's different categories of setting up your room. I agree with what they're getting at, but theirs is really the newbie, how to set up first time. There's also how to set up if you're maybe doing content stuff, right? Or streaming and you want green screen. There's a whole thing on how to do that would be separate from this. So this is basically how to set up for somebody who hasn't set up for VR yet. So the first step they talk about is clearing space. That sounds obvious, but I'm sure some of you probably know people who have so much clutter that you're basically, doing long jumps and hurdles just to get around. That would apply to them. You definitely want to clear space. I know the times where I've, especially when I had it on this side here behind me, the man cave, how many times, I'd forget to put the boxes away and then I'd punch them with my Vive controller, which scares the crap out of you in VR because suddenly, the noise startles you and then everything basically tumbling down like dominoes, right? So, yeah. Captain Obvious, but very important for some people. Next one, get a swivel chair, and I agree with that. Even in games where it's not realistic, like in Elite Dangerous, I envision that chair being a swivel chair. Even though it doesn't have that animation, I think you'd have a swivel chair probably, right? You've got systems to the left, systems to the right. I just think it adds to the immersion for you to turn and access those panels. Likewise, for car games. And I think part of that for me, why that's important, is because we have a limited field of view in those games that doesn't match our actual human field of view. Having a swivel chair helps with that and allows you to kind of just keep that same level of immersion, in my opinion. So swivel chair, definitely important. which reminds me, since I'm moving to the other side of the country, there is a chair manufacturer, gaming chair, DX Racer. It's actually a Canadian company, local here. I should probably grab a chair before I leave. I don't know if any of you guys have tried it, but in my opinion, just a fantastic gaming chair. Then they talk about watering yourself, and that has nothing to do with incontinence. What they're saying is get and stay hydrated. It'll help with motion sickness. And then their last suggestion is dimming the lights, which I think makes sense. It's another Captain Obvious statement, but some people will do it in the bright light. And if you've already got light leakage with your HMD, because nobody's face is structured the same, yeah, you're going to want to mitigate that and turn off your lights. And I haven't said this for a while, but if you've got red light available and you can look down, the bridge of your nose on your Rift and Vive like I can, make sure that you have stuff with red light, which can preserve your night vision. So if you do have to type, you can do that with an RGB keyboard like what I have set to red. So all in all, decent steps, but again, targeted more to the beginner setting up. Next story is an update to the IMAX experience, which we talked about last on the March 29th VR news. I've got the link here. Now, I haven't, like I said, been able to check out the comments like I have in the past because of how tumultuous everything is right now in my life. But one of the things that I did want to say is, because I saw a comment about, you talked about a YouTube video, could you link it? So I'm going to make sure if I reference previous YouTube videos that I put the link in the story. And I've done that for this one. So the March 29th episode talking about IMAX, it's linked here. You'll see it in the description below. But at that point in time, I said they'd sold 15,000 tickets, right? Roughly 15,000, roughly 7,500 per month, because it was 2 months post-launch. Well, in the last 22 days, they've apparently sold another 5,000. So they seem to be able to keep the same pace of about 7,500 tickets a month, which isn't a bad pace. They're going to open a second LA location, then New York, then spread out across the globe. I would imagine Canadian locations probably next, because we've got a lot of those IMAXs in place already. And then places like Shanghai, Tokyo, etc. Next story, a London bar serving a Scottish drink alongside a VR. In other words, you can try on the virtual reality HMD to find out all about that whiskey that you happen to be drinking. So this is a London bar offering this, and it allows the drinker to escape the city for the Scottish hills. So the whiskey-based Origin cocktail comes with a VR headset that transports you to the distillery where the spirit is from. So it's 18 pounds, which is, again, $23 US a shot. It's made with 12-year-old Dalmore whiskey. And it's literally meant to not only show you where the ingredients come from, but the distillery, the land around it, just to really give you a sense of where your drink is coming from. That's not really an important thing for me. Don't get me wrong, it would be cool just from the sense that, you get to explore VR, and that's always a good thing for me. But I'm really not too caring about where my drink comes from, but a cool touch nonetheless. Where I would be interested, say I was visiting a brewery or a distillery, to then be able to do that experience. Probably not at a bar, but it's a cool idea for those who would be interested in that. And it was the idea of Pedro Paulo. He is the proprietor and bar manager for the company, and that's what he told Reuters. And he said, we get a lot of people saying, oh, I have goosebumps because it's happening in front of me. And when they take off the headset and have the drink right in front of them, it really gives them the sense of uniqueness, like they had a unique experience, not just a shot of whiskey. So I get that. And like I said, I think that's neat. Not so important for me, especially at that price. Not that I'm being cheap. Okay, maybe I am, but you get my drift. So there you go. So if you're in London, you want to have a $23 shot of whiskey, probably pretty damn good. Try that out with the VR HMD. All right, the next and last story has to do with an article from the India Economic Times, and it talks about virtual reality being in what's called the quote-unquote trough of disillusionment. Now, anybody who's watching maybe from a different country, what a trough is basically the rectangular box that farmers will put food or drink in for farm animals like pigs to eat or drink from. But it's also a gully or a valley. So that's where that comes from. So in other words, trough of disillusionment means you are down and out, is what they're getting at. This is all based, this India Economic Times article, on something that the technology research group Gartner came up with. They call it the hype cycle, and it's been around for 20 years at least, so this isn't something that's just come up to justify or defend VR. No, it's been around. It's very applicable to new technologies in general, not based on a hell of a lot of science, but it has some phases that make sense. So there's 5 phases. Technology trigger, that's kind of like the introduction of it. Media interest is heightened. People start hearing about it. Then the second one, the peak of inflated expectations. That would probably be best described as the beginning of 2016 and the end of 2015. The third phase, and the one that the article says we are in now, the trough of disillusionment, right? Expectations maybe not being met. And they say the next 2 phases are very dependent on most of us, the early adopters, which most of my viewers are, including myself. Our actions apparently the most important with the next 2. So the next one is phase 4, slope of enlightenment. More instances of how the technology can benefit start to crystallize. And this is where we always talk about stuff beyond gaming. That's going to ensure a foothold. Once you get that foothold, you plant that flag, the technology is not going anywhere. That is hopefully what's going to happen for us. And then the last phase in the cycle is the plateau of productivity. That is where mainstream adoption starts to take off. So very cool. You can check that out. I've got the linking to that India Times article if you're interested in more. Other than that, guys, off for other stuff. Hope you guys are having a great weekend and that the rest is kick-ass. Catch you guys tomorrow. As always, cheers.